The last thing Julian expected to see in his own backyard was a wedding. Specifically, a wedding where his wife, Isabel, was the bride, and the groom was a man he knew all too well. He stood at the edge of the manicured lawn, the familiar scent of cut grass and blooming roses now laced with the cloying sweetness of expensive champagne and betrayal. A white silk runner stretched from the patio doors to a floral arch, a path he and Isabel had designed together, a path she was now walking toward another man. Her hand was tucked into the arm of Marcus Thorne, a man whose smile was as polished as his $1,000 shoes, a man who had, until this very moment, been their friend. Julian felt a strange calm descend, a crystalline stillness in the eye of a hurricane that had been building for months. He had come home 3 days early from his business trip to Kyoto. They thought he was on the other side of the world, probably staying in a budget hotel, attending a dreary architectural conference they assumed he could barely afford. They didn't know the conference was a cover story. They didn't know his trip was to Tokyo for a board meeting. They didn't know he owned the board. They thought he was Julian Croft, the quiet, moderately successful architect, a man of modest means and even more modest ambition. They were wrong. And within the next hour, their entire world, built on a foundation of lies and condescension, was going to be demolished. Thank you for joining us for this story. We know you're going to want to see how this unfolds. Before we dive in, if you enjoy stories about justice and seeing arrogance get its comeuppance, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We love hearing from you, so tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. Now let's go back and see how it all began. The first tremor had been subtle, a barely perceptible shift in the tectonic plates of their marriage. It happened 6 months prior, at a dinner party hosted by Isabel's mother, Elena. The dining room was Elena's pride, a stage for her curated life, all cream linens and polished silver. Julian had always felt like a prop in these productions, the slightly out-of-place husband who didn't quite match the decor. That night, Marcus was the guest of honor. He had just closed a major deal in private equity, and the air was thick with his success. "Julian, darling," Elena began, her voice a little too bright, a little too sharp. "Marcus was just telling us about his new acquisition, a tech firm in Silicon Valley. Isn't that marvelous?" She didn't wait for an answer. "He works so incredibly hard. The hours, the pressure. It's the world of real consequence, you know?" The implication hung in the air, as heavy and unappetizing as the overcooked roast beef on Julian's plate. The world of real consequence, as opposed to his own. The world of drafting blueprints for libraries and community centers. Julian had always loved the tangible nature of his work, the idea of creating spaces that would serve people for generations. But in Elena's world, value was measured not in public good, but in private jets. Marcus leaned back in his chair, a gesture of casual ownership, as if he were already at the head of this family table. "It's a different kind of architecture, I suppose," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "I build portfolios. You build, well, buildings." He laughed and Elena joined in, a high, tinkling sound that grated on Julian's nerves. Isabel was silent. She traced the rim of her wine glass with a perfectly manicured finger, her gaze fixed on the crimson liquid. In her silence, Julian heard a verdict. She didn't defend him. She didn't challenge the insult. She simply let it land. Another small crack in their foundation. "My latest project is a public housing redevelopment," Julian said, his voice even and calm. He refused to be baited, refused to let them see his hurt. "We're focusing on sustainable materials and green spaces. The goal is to create a community, not just a complex." Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "Noble, I'm sure. Very noble. But does it pay, Julian? At the end of the day, that's the game, isn't it? Who's winning?" He looked from Julian to Isabel, a glint of challenge in his eyes. He was staking a claim, marking his territory. "That depends on how you define winning," Julian replied softly. He reached down and his fingers brushed against the worn leather of the portfolio case that rested by his chair. It was old, a gift from his first mentor, and he carried it everywhere. Inside, they imagined, were his modest blueprints, his small-scale dreams. They had no idea it contained the architecture of their downfall. Later that night, as they drove home in their sensible, paid-for sedan, the silence in the car was a living thing. Isabel stared out the passenger window, the city lights flashing across her unreadable face. "You were quiet tonight," Julian said, breaking the tension. "I was tired," she replied, not looking at him. "Isabel," he waited. "He was insulting. My work, our life, and you said nothing." She finally turned to him, her expression a mixture of frustration and something that looked unnervingly like pity. "Oh, Julian, don't be so sensitive. It's just how Marcus is. He's a shark. That's why he's successful. You can't expect someone like him to understand your passions." The word passions was delivered as if it were a euphemism for hobbies. It was the moment Julian understood. She wasn't just tolerating their condescension. She was beginning to share it. She was looking at him through their eyes and seeing a man who wasn't enough. "My passions, as you call them, built the home you live in. They paid for the life we have," he said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "And it's a nice life," she said, her voice softening, but it was the kind of softness one uses to placate a child. "It's a comfortable life. But Marcus, he operates on another level. Elena sees it. I see it. It's not a criticism of you, it's just a fact." It was, in fact, a criticism. It was the most profound criticism she could have leveled, for it wasn't about a single action or a disagreement. It was about his very essence. He was being weighed, measured, and found wanting. He parked the car in the driveway of their beautiful, architect-designed home, a home he had poured his soul into, and felt for the first time like a guest. As they walked inside, he looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw a stranger evaluating an asset. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that she was preparing to divest. The storm had not yet broken, but the barometer was falling, and he needed to prepare. He was a man who designed structures to withstand earthquakes. He would apply the same principles to his life. The weeks that followed the disastrous dinner party were a masterclass in emotional erosion. The small condescensions became a steady, grinding pressure. Marcus was a constant presence, no longer just a friend, but a fixture in their lives, invited by Isabel and Elena under the thinnest of pretexts. He would show up on weekends, dressed in expensive athletic wear, to drag Isabel out for a run, leaving Julian behind with a patronizing pat on the shoulder and a comment about how he should get out more. One Saturday afternoon, Julian was in his home study, a sanctuary of light and clean lines he had designed himself. He was sketching preliminary designs for a pediatric hospital wing, a pro bono project he had taken on. The work was complex and deeply meaningful to him. He was lost in the intricate dance of form and function when Isabel and Marcus returned, their faces flushed, their laughter echoing in the hall. They came into the study without knocking. Marcus, still sweating from their run, leaned over Julian's drafting table, his shadow falling across the delicate lines of the blueprint. "Still drawing your little pictures, Julian?" Marcus asked, his tone dripping with faux admiration. He picked up one of Julian's precision-milled aluminum rulers. "You know, I just bought a company that uses AI to generate architectural plans in seconds. Renders the whole thing in VR. Your job's going to be obsolete in 5 years." He tossed the ruler back on the table with a clatter, nicking the edge of the heavy paper. Julian felt a flash of hot anger. It wasn't just the disrespect for his work, but the violation of his space, the careless disregard for his tools. He looked at Isabel, expecting her to say something, to defend the sanctity of his profession, of his office. She just smiled, a tight, forced expression. "Marcus, don't tease him. Julian's work is very traditional." It was meant to sound like a defense, but it was an affirmation of Marcus's point. Traditional, old-fashioned, obsolete. Tradition doesn't pay the bills for a waterfront property in the Hamptons, does it? Marcus said, winking at Isabel. It was a clear, brazen reference to a future he was planning with her, a future from which Julian was conspicuously absent. Julian carefully placed his pencil in its groove on the table. He stood up slowly, his movements deliberate. He was taller than Marcus, a fact that seemed to perpetually surprise the other man. The value of a hospital isn't measured by its proximity to the water, Marcus, Julian said, his voice quiet but resonant. It's measured in the lives that are saved within its walls. Some things are more important than a balance sheet. He held Marcus's gaze, a silent battle being waged over the drafting table. Marcus, for a moment, looked taken aback by the directness, the lack of apology in Julian's tone. But he recovered quickly, falling back on his usual arrogance. "Spoken like a true artist," he sneered. "Let me know how that philosophy works out for you. Izzy, let's go. I've made reservations at Per Se. My treat." Isabel's eyes lit up. Per Se was a place Julian knew she'd always wanted to go, a place he had been planning to take her for their upcoming anniversary. The fact that Marcus was taking her felt like a deliberate, calculated cruelty. "Oh, Marcus, you shouldn't have," she gushed, the protest thin and unconvincing. She glanced at Julian, a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, in her eyes. "Julian, you don't mind, do you? We were just going to have a quiet night in, but—" "You should go," Julian said, his face an unreadable mask. "Enjoy yourselves." He watched them leave, their laughter fading down the hall. He stood alone in his study, the silence returning, now heavier than before. The nick on his blueprint paper seemed to mock him, a tiny, jagged wound. He ran his finger over it, then looked at his hands. These were the hands that had designed this house, that drafted plans for schools and shelters. They were capable, creative, strong hands. Yet in the eyes of his wife and her new companion, they were the hands of a failure. He walked over to the window, looking out at the garden. He could feel the structure of his life being systematically dismantled. But Marcus and Isabel were making a classic amateur's mistake. They were so focused on demolishing the visible parts of the building, they had no idea about the strength of the foundation they couldn't see. They thought he was a simple wood frame house, easily torn down. They didn't know he was a skyscraper, anchored to bedrock deep beneath the earth. He walked back to his desk and sat down. He ignored the damaged blueprint. Instead, he pulled his old leather portfolio onto his lap. He opened it, the worn clasps clicking softly in the quiet room. Inside, beneath a sheaf of architectural drawings he kept there for appearances, was a false bottom. He lifted it, revealing a slim satellite phone and a single encrypted flash drive. He picked up the phone. It powered on with a quiet hum, displaying a single contact, A. Sharma. He pressed the call button. It rang twice before a crisp, clear voice answered. "Julian, I was wondering when you'd call. Is everything all right?" "Anya," he said, his voice losing its strained calm and settling into a familiar tone of command. "It's time. I need you to start the preliminary due diligence on Thorn Capital Partners." There was a pause on the other end, then Anya's voice returned, a hint of steel in it. "Consider it done. Are you sure about this, Julian? Once this process starts, it's irreversible." Julian looked around his silent, beautiful study, the ghost of Marcus's arrogant laughter still hanging in the air. He thought of Isabel's pitying eyes, her easy acceptance of another man's largesse. "I'm sure," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "They've mistaken my patience for weakness. It's time to remind them what I'm capable of. Liquidate whatever is necessary. I want controlling interest. And Anya, I want it to be quiet. No one sees the architect until the building is complete." "Understood," Anya replied. "Welcome back, Julian." He ended the call and placed the satellite phone back in its hidden compartment. He looked at the blueprint on his desk, the one Marcus had scarred. With a steady hand, he took a fresh sheet of vellum and laid it over the top. He began to draw again, his lines fluid and certain. He was an architect, after all, and he was about to design the most elegant, inescapable structure of his life, a structure of pure consequence. The escalation quickened, like a gathering avalanche. Isabel announced she was going on a girls' trip to the spa for a long weekend. It was an obvious lie. Her packing was too deliberate, her avoidance of his gaze too pronounced. She packed her best dresses, not robes and slippers. Julian watched her from the doorway of their bedroom, a silent observer at the dismantling of his own life. "You seem to be packing a lot for a spa weekend," he commented, his tone neutral. He was testing the lie, seeing how far she would push it. She didn't look up from the suitcase on the bed. "You know how I am. I like having options." She folded a silk blouse with meticulous care. "Besides, Elena and I might go out for a nice dinner or two." Elena, the ever-present alibi. Her mother had become more than just an enabler. She was an active co-conspirator, providing cover for Isabel's slow-motion departure from the marriage. "I hope you have a wonderful time," Julian said. There was no sarcasm in his voice, only a profound, aching sadness. He was mourning a woman who was still standing in front of him. "Relax, you seem stressed lately." For a moment, his genuine concern seemed to break through her facade. She stopped packing and looked at him, her expression softening. "I am, Julian. I'm just confused about a lot of things." Here it was, the opening, the chance for a real conversation. He could have pressed, demanded the truth, started the fight that was looming on the horizon. But a part of him, the strategic, patient part, held him back. A premature confrontation would be messy, emotional. It would give her the moral high ground of his anger. No, the plan he was setting in motion required precision, not passion. It required his opponents to be comfortable, confident, and completely unaware. "Well, I hope the trip helps you find some clarity," he said simply. He walked over, kissed her on the forehead, and left the room. From the bottom of the stairs, he heard the snap of the suitcase latches, a sound of finality. The next morning, he made her coffee, just as he always did. They sat in the sun-drenched breakfast nook, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. When the doorbell rang, Isabel jumped, startled. "That'll be my mother," she said, a little too quickly. Julian walked to the door. It wasn't Elena's sensible hybrid parked at the curb. It was Marcus's gleaming black Porsche, idling like a predator. Marcus was behind the wheel, sunglasses on, a confident smirk already in place. He gave Julian a mock salute. Julian turned back to Isabel, who was standing in the hall, her suitcase at her feet. Their eyes met. The lie was now exposed, sitting there in the driveway for both of them to see. She had the decency to blush. "His car was in the shop," she stammered. "Elena asked him to give me a ride to the spa on his way out of town." The excuse was so flimsy, so insulting in its lack of effort, that Julian almost laughed. "Of course," he said, his voice flat. He picked up her suitcase. "Let me help you with this." He walked her out to the car, the perfect, accommodating husband. He refused to give Marcus the satisfaction of a scene. He was an actor now, playing a part, and the role was the fool. He played it to perfection. "Morning, Julian," Marcus said, not bothering to get out of the car. "Just giving the lady a lift, making sure she gets her much-needed R&R." "That's very thoughtful of you, Marcus," Julian said, placing the suitcase in the small trunk of the sports car. He closed it gently. He looked at Isabel, who wouldn't meet his eye. "Have a safe trip." She mumbled a thank you and quickly got into the passenger seat, closing the door. As the Porsche pulled away from the curb, Julian saw her look back at the house, their house, with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't regret, not yet. It was something more complex. Apprehension, perhaps. Or maybe she was just appraising it one last time before she and Marcus put it on the market. He stood on the sidewalk until the car disappeared around the corner. The street was quiet again. The sun was warm on his face. He felt a profound sense of release. The pretense was over. The battle lines were drawn, even if only he could see them clearly. He went back inside and walked directly to his study. The house felt vast and empty, but not lonely. It felt clean. He sat at his desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. At the top, he wrote a simple heading, List of Grievances. He began to write, his pen moving swiftly across the page. He didn't write with anger, but with the cool detachment of an accountant taking inventory. The dinner party. Elena's comment on real consequence. Isabel's silence. Marcus's visit to the study. The insult to his profession. The damaged blueprint. The lie about per se. The lie about the spa trip. The Porsche in the driveway. He listed every slight, every condescending remark, every moment of casual cruelty. He wasn't cataloging pain to wallow in it, he was building a case. Each item was a brick, and he was using them to construct a fortress of justification around the actions he was about to take. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was a messy, emotional act. This was about justice. Justice was a precise, structural principle, as clean and unyielding as a steel beam. When he finished, the list covered 2 full pages. He read it over once, then folded the paper neatly and tucked it into his wallet. It was a reminder, a touchstone for the difficult days ahead, a way to keep his resolve from wavering. His phone buzzed. It was a text from an encrypted number, Anya's number. Due diligence on TCP is complete. The structure is more fragile than it appears. Significant exposure in the commercial real estate sector. Over-leveraged. Their largest creditor is a subsidiary of Kogyo Bank of Japan. Your move. Julian smiled. Kogyo Bank. Anya was brilliant. No one would ever trace ownership back from a Japanese megabank to him. Marcus thought he was a master of the universe, a titan of finance. In reality, he was just a tenant in a building, and his landlord was about to change the locks. He texted back a single word. Acquire. He then stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the garden. The roses were in full bloom. He had planted them with Isabel the first spring they were in the house. He felt a pang of sadness, a ghost of the love that had once lived here. But ghosts couldn't hurt you. He was more interested in the living. He thought of Isabel and Marcus, speeding toward their fantasy weekend, laughing at the fool they'd left behind. They had no idea that while they were playing games, he was buying the entire board. The architect was done sketching. It was time to start building. A week later, Isabel returned. She came back to the house full of a nervous, brittle energy. The supposed spa trip had clearly been a success in her mind. She carried herself with a new, almost defiant confidence. She was testing her power, seeing how much she could get away with. She found Julian in the kitchen, calmly reading a book on Japanese garden design. "I'm back," she announced, dropping her keys on the granite countertop with a clatter. "Welcome home," he said, looking up from his book. "Did you have a good time? Are you feeling more clarified?" He used her own word, a gentle, almost undetectable barb. "It was wonderful," she said, ignoring the nuance. "So relaxing. The massages, the mud baths, exactly what I needed." She was lying so easily now. The practice had made her fluent. "Elena sends her love." "That's nice of her," Julian said, closing his book but keeping his finger in place. "I have some news, actually. I've been invited to be a keynote speaker at the Global Symposium for Sustainable Design in Kyoto. It's a huge honor." Isabel's eyes widened. "Kyoto? In Japan?" The surprise in her voice was genuine. In her mind, Julian's professional world was small and local. A trip to Japan didn't fit the narrative of the struggling architect she had constructed. "That's the one," he said. "It's for 3 weeks. They're covering all expenses, of course. First-class flight, a suite at the Hyatt Regency. It's a pretty big deal. He was layering his own fiction over hers, but his was built with a core of truth. He was going to Japan. The conference was real, though he was attending as a silent benefactor, not a speaker. The suite was real. The first-class flight was real. He was simply omitting the fact that it would be on a private jet owned by his own company. Isabel stared at him, processing. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. Was she misjudging him? Could this quiet man actually have a professional life she knew nothing about? But the doubt was quickly extinguished by her own desires. 3 weeks. Julian gone for 3 weeks. The opportunity was too perfect. Her surprise morphed into enthusiastic support. Julian, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you. You have to go. When is it? I leave in 2 days, he said. The relief on her face was so palpable, it was almost comical. It was as if he had just handed her a gift-wrapped key to her new life. Oh, wow. So soon. Well, you absolutely must. We can celebrate when you get back. The next 2 days were a blur of faux domesticity. Isabel helped him pack, fussing over which ties he should take, offering to iron his shirts. Her performance was flawless. She was the supportive wife, proud of her husband's sudden, unexpected success. All the while, Julian could see the calculations in her eyes. 3 weeks of freedom. 3 weeks to consolidate her new life with Marcus. The morning he left, she drove him to the airport. It was a mirror image of him watching her leave with Marcus, but this time the roles were reversed. As he got out of the car, she gave him a hug that felt both hollow and desperate. Be safe, she said. Call me when you land. I will, he promised, knowing he would do no such thing. He watched her drive away, then turned and walked into the airport. He went through the main terminal, playing his part until he was out of public view. Then, he took a discreet side exit to the private aviation wing. Anya Sharma was waiting for him on the tarmac, standing at the base of the stairs to a sleek Gulfstream G650. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an aura of absolute command. She wore a tailored suit, and her presence made the bustling airfield seem to stand still. Julian, she said with a warm smile, embracing him. You look tired. The emotional cost of demolition is higher than the financial one, he replied, a wry twist to his mouth. They always are, she said, her smile fading into a look of concern. Are you ready for this? The final pieces are in place. The acquisition of Thorn Capital Partners debt from Kogyo Bank was finalized this morning. We now hold the lease, Julian. When you give the word, we pull it. Good, he said, looking up at the jet. Let's get to Tokyo. There's one more asset I need to secure before the fun begins. As the jet climbed into the sky, leaving the city behind, Julian looked out the window. Down below, Isabel was probably on the phone with Marcus, laughing, celebrating her newfound freedom. She would be telling him that the pathetic, predictable husband was finally out of the picture for a while. In his hand, Julian held a single document Anya had just given him. It was a deed. The deed to the Hamptons waterfront property that Marcus had recently purchased as a surprise for Isabel, the one he had bragged about. He had purchased it through a Shell LLC, leveraged to the hilt with a loan from a bank that was, ultimately, a subsidiary of a company Anya controlled. When Marcus defaulted, and Anya's team would ensure he did, the property would revert to them, to Julian. He had told Anya he wanted to be the architect. He was designing a prison of their own making. He now owned the walls of their current life, in the form of their home. And he had just acquired the blueprint for their future, in the form of their dream house. They thought he was on the other side of the planet, obsolete and forgotten. They had no idea he was closer than ever, holding the very foundations of their world in his hands. The quiet, traditional architect was about to teach them a brutal lesson about modern finance, and the tuition was going to be everything they had. The 2 weeks of Julian's supposed trip were a period of delirious freedom for Isabel and Marcus. They acted like lottery winners who had just been handed the oversized check. With Julian safely in Kyoto, they dropped all pretense. Marcus essentially moved into the house, his Porsche a permanent fixture in the driveway. His expensive suits hung in Julian's closet. His garish gold watch sat on Julian's bedside table. They were playing house in a home that wasn't theirs, drunk on a future they hadn't earned. Isabel's mother, Elena, was a frequent visitor, her face alight with triumphant vindication. She would tour the house as if she were a victorious general inspecting conquered territory. "You've done the right thing, darling," she told Isabel one afternoon as they sat by the pool, sipping mimosas. Marcus was on a loud business call nearby, pacing and barking orders into his phone. "Look at him. This is a man of substance, a man who gets things done. Not like, well, you know." They didn't even use Julian's name anymore. He had been relegated to a vague, dismissive pronoun, an inconvenient memory they were actively erasing. "I know, Mother," Isabel said, a dreamy look on her face. "Marcus wants us to get married, as soon as possible." Elena clapped her hands together. "Oh, Isabel, that's wonderful. But what about the situation?" "Marcus has a plan," Isabel said confidently. "His lawyers say that since Julian is out of the country, we can file for an expedited divorce based on abandonment. By the time he gets back, it will be well underway. Marcus says we shouldn't wait. He wants to have a commitment ceremony. Right here." She gestured grandly at the garden. "A big party to announce our engagement and our future. He wants to do it next weekend before Julian gets back." Elena's eyes gleamed. "A party? Here? What a marvelous idea. It's a statement. It shows everyone you're moving on, that you're with a real winner now. We'll redecorate, of course. This whole sad, minimalist aesthetic has to go. We need color, life. We need to get rid of all his stuff." And so they began the purge. Julian's books on architectural history were boxed up and moved to the garage. The photos of him and Isabel from their travels were taken down from the walls, leaving pale rectangles on the paint. His favorite armchair, the one he'd inherited from his father, was unceremoniously dragged into the basement. They were systematically erasing him from the physical space, just as they had erased him from their consideration. Marcus, in a fit of arrogant glee, decided to renovate Julian's study. He declared it was going to be his new command center. He had Julian's drafting table, a beautiful, custom-made piece of maple and steel, dismantled and thrown out. "We'll put a massive mahogany desk here," he announced to Isabel, standing in the middle of the now empty room. "And a stock ticker on that wall. This is a room for making money, not for doodling." Isabel, who had once claimed to love the quiet creativity of that room, simply nodded in agreement. She was fully under his spell, mesmerized by the mirage of wealth and power he projected. Meanwhile, in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the sprawling expanse of Tokyo, Julian was methodically orchestrating their demise. The room was silent, except for the quiet clicks of keyboards and the murmur of Japanese. Anya Sharma sat beside him, a master conductor guiding her orchestra of analysts and lawyers. "The leverage points are secure, Julian," she reported, pointing to a complex diagram on a large screen. "Thorn Capital Partners is a house of cards. We've acquired the debt on his 3 largest commercial properties. We've also flagged his personal accounts for suspicious activity. The man is sloppy. He commingles personal and corporate funds. When we pull the plug, it won't just be his company that implodes. It will be his entire financial life." Julian nodded, his face grim. He took no pleasure in the details, only a grim satisfaction in the necessity of the action. "And the house? The one in the Hamptons?" "The trap is set," Anya confirmed. "He missed his first major payment as we predicted. The bank we control has sent him a preliminary notice of default. His lawyers have replied with a request for forbearance, citing temporary cash flow issues. They are blissfully unaware that they are negotiating with us. Julian looked at the diagram on the screen. It was a web of companies, loans, and legal entities. To an outsider, it was impenetrable, but to him, it was a blueprint. He could see the structural weaknesses, the stress points, the exact spot where a single, precise cut would bring the entire edifice crashing down. He received a text message. It was from a neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, whom he'd helped redesign her garden a few years back. The text contained a single photo, a large catering truck parked in his driveway. The caption read, "Looks like Isabel is planning a big party. Hope you're coming home soon to enjoy it." Julian showed the photo to Anya. "They're getting bold," he said. "They're planning a celebration on my property. With my wife." Anya looked at the photo, then at Julian. "The timing is fortuitous. What do you want to do?" Julian thought for a moment. He could let it happen. He could pull the financial rug out from under them from afar, leaving them to collapse in a heap of their own making. But that felt incomplete. It lacked a certain architectural integrity. A building's demolition should be witnessed. The people who thought it was invincible should be there to see it fall. "Change of plans, Anya," he said, a new resolve hardening his voice. "The board meeting is finished. My work here is done. Book the jet. I'm going home." "When?" Julian looked at his watch, calculating the time difference. The party, according to the caterer's schedule, which Anya's team had already procured, was in 2 days. Saturday afternoon. "I want to land Saturday morning," he said. "I don't want to be late for my own party." A cold, thin smile touched his lips for the first time in days. "And Anya, I think you should come with me. I believe you're the primary shareholder of the company Marcus Thorne works for. It seems only appropriate that you be there for his performance review." Anya's sharp, intelligent eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "Julian, I wouldn't miss it for the world." The day of the party was perfect. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree in the center of the yard. White tents had been erected on the lawn, and waiters in crisp uniforms moved among the guests, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly near the floral arch. It was the picture of elegant, effortless wealth. Isabel was radiant. She wore a simple but exquisitely expensive white cocktail dress. Her hand was linked with Marcus's as they mingled, accepting congratulations and compliments. Marcus was in his element, holding court, his voice booming with confidence. He had a glass of champagne in one hand and his other arm wrapped possessively around Isabel's waist. "To the future," he toasted, raising his glass to a group of friends. "A future of success, happiness, and making the right choices." He squeezed Isabel's waist and looked down at her, a proprietary smile on his face. The subtext was clear. She was his greatest acquisition. Elena fluttered around them like a proud moth, her face a mask of smug satisfaction. She cornered a distant cousin of Isabel's. "Isn't he wonderful?" she whispered conspiratorially, nodding toward Marcus. "A real man, not like that dreary architect. Isabel is finally going to have the life she deserves. He just bought her the most magnificent house in the Hamptons. We're so blessed." The guests, a mix of Marcus's finance world colleagues and Isabel's family friends, were all appropriately impressed. They saw the beautiful house, the expensive champagne, the confident man, and the glowing woman. They saw the picture that Marcus and Isabel wanted them to see. A perfect couple embarking on a perfect life. No one noticed the black town car that pulled up silently to the curb at the end of the street. It parked discreetly, away from the valet service that was handling the guests' luxury vehicles. The back door opened, and Julian stepped out. He wore a simple, dark, impeccably tailored suit. He looked not like a man who had just gotten off a 14-hour flight, but like a man arriving for a board meeting. He carried his old, worn leather portfolio in one hand. Anya Sharma stepped out of the other side of the car. She was the picture of understated power, her presence radiating an authority that made Marcus's boisterous confidence seem childish by comparison. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, observing the scene. The laughter, the music, the clinking glasses. It all seemed to be happening under a glass dome, a perfect, fragile snow globe of self-delusion. "Are you ready?" Anya asked, her voice quiet. "I've been ready for 6 months," Julian replied. He started walking toward the house. Not up the main walkway, crowded with guests, but around the side, along the stone path he had laid with his own hands years ago. It led to the side gate of the backyard. The gate was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped onto the lawn. For a moment, no one saw him. The string quartet was playing a cheerful Vivaldi piece, and all eyes were on Marcus, who had just tapped a spoon against his glass to call for attention. "Friends, family," Marcus began, his voice filled with emotion that was as manufactured as the floral arrangements. "Thank you all for being here on this incredibly special day, a day for new beginnings. Isabel and I are so thrilled to share our joy with you as we—" He trailed off. His eyes had drifted past the crowd and had landed on the figure standing near the old oak tree. His smile faltered. The confident posture sagged. A flicker of confusion, then alarm, crossed his face. Isabel, sensing the shift in his tone, turned to see what he was looking at. Her face, which had been glowing with happiness, went pale. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the stone patio, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. The music from the string quartet faltered, one violin squeaking to a halt, then another, until only the gentle breeze could be heard. Every head turned, and there he was, Julian, her husband, standing in the middle of their wedding party, looking at them with an expression of profound, unassailable calm. He hadn't come to plead or to rage. He had come to collect. The architect had arrived for the final inspection, and the demolition was about to begin. The silence that fell over the party was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket of shock and disbelief. The 100 or so guests stood frozen, their champagne flutes halfway to their lips, their smiling faces slowly hardening into masks of confusion. They looked from the pale, horrified face of Isabel to the swaggering arrogance draining out of Marcus, and then to the calm, immovable figure of Julian standing by the oak tree. Julian took a slow, deliberate step forward, the sound of his leather-soled shoe on the grass seeming to echo in the stillness. He wasn't looking at the crowd. His eyes were locked on Isabel. He saw the panic in her gaze, the frantic search for an explanation, a way to spin this impossible reality. It was Elena who broke the spell. Her maternal instinct, twisted into a grotesque form of social damage control, kicked in. She rushed to Isabel's side, her voice a harsh, theatrical whisper that carried across the lawn. "What is he doing here? I thought he was in Japan. Isabel, do something." Marcus, recovering a sliver of his bravado, stepped in front of Isabel, shielding her as if Julian were a physical threat. It was a pathetic, posturing gesture, and it only served to highlight his own fear. "Julian," Marcus said, his voice attempting a tone of command, but emerging as a strained croak. "What is the meaning of this? You're not welcome here. This is a private event." Julian stopped about 15 feet from them. He allowed a small, humorless smile to touch his lips. "A private event? In my house, Marcus?" "I don't think so." The statement landed with the force of a physical blow. A murmur went through the crowd. His house. The possessive pronoun was a declaration of war. "This isn't your house anymore," Marcus blustered, gesturing vaguely. "Isabel is divorcing you. For abandonment. You left. This is her home now. Our home." Julian's calm expression didn't waver. "Abandonment?" he repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Is that what you call it when your wife tells you she's going to a spa and gets in your car instead? Is that what you call it when you're sent on a business trip under false pretenses so she can marry another man in your backyard? He let the questions hang in the air, each one a perfectly aimed stone. Isabel flinched as if she'd been struck. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her looking ghostly in her white dress. She looked at the faces of her friends and family and saw not sympathy, but dawning comprehension and judgment. Her perfect day was curdling into a public nightmare. "You have no right," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "No right?" Julian's voice rose slightly, not in anger but in sheer disbelief. He took another step forward. "I have every right. I have the right of a husband who has been lied to. I have the right of a man who has been mocked in his own home." He then did something that shifted the entire dynamic of the confrontation. He opened his worn leather portfolio. The guests leaned in, curious. They expected him to pull out a crumpled legal notice, perhaps. Instead, he produced a single, crisp document. He held it up. "And I have the right of the sole, unencumbered owner of this property," he said, his voice ringing with clarity. "This is the deed to 124 Willow Lane. My name is the only one on it. It was purchased with my money from an inheritance I received long before I ever met you, Isabel. Your name is on the mortgage as a courtesy, but you have no legal claim to this house. None at all." He placed the deed on a nearby table with a quiet finality. It sat there, a simple piece of paper that single-handedly dismantled their entire premise. This wasn't their home to claim. They were, and always had been, living in his. Marcus stared at the deed, then back at Julian, his mind racing. This wasn't the broke, pathetic architect he had constructed in his mind. This was something else. But his arrogance was a fortress, not easily breached. "A house," Marcus scoffed, trying to regain the upper hand. "You're fighting over a house? That's pathetic, Julian. I can buy a dozen of these. I just bought Isabel a palace in the Hamptons, something you could never even dream of affording. We don't need this place." He put his arm around Isabel again, a gesture meant to reassure her, to reestablish his dominance. "Let him have his little house. We have an empire to build." Julian's calm was unnerving. He watched Marcus's pathetic display without a flicker of emotion. "An empire, Marcus? Is that what you call it?" He turned his gaze to the crowd, then back to Marcus. "You talk about building empires, but you don't even own the bricks." He reached into his portfolio again. This time he pulled out a thicker sheaf of documents, bound in a dark blue cover. "You see," Julian continued, his voice taking on the patient tone of a professor explaining a complex theorem to a struggling student. "You and I have a different philosophy on building. You build with debt, with other people's money. You construct flimsy structures on shaky ground and call them skyscrapers. I, on the other hand, believe in foundations." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "You mentioned your new acquisition, the tech firm, and your commercial properties, and of course that lovely house in the Hamptons, all leveraged, all financed through a series of loans you thought were brilliantly complex." From the edge of the crowd, Anya Sharma began to walk forward. Her heels made no sound on the soft grass. She moved with an unhurried grace that commanded attention. The guests parted for her instinctively. Marcus's eyes widened as he saw her. He recognized her. Anyone in the world of high finance recognized Anya Sharma, the legendary CEO of the global behemoth, Sterling Westwood Holdings. "Marcus Thorne," Anya said, her voice cool and sharp as ice. She stopped beside Julian. "I believe we have a meeting." Marcus was speechless. He looked from Anya to Julian and back again, his brain unable to connect the two. "Ms. Sharma, what are you doing here?" "I'm here with my partner," she said simply, gesturing to Julian. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. Partner. Julian Croft, the quiet architect, was partners with Anya Sharma. The idea was so preposterous, so world-altering, that it broke Marcus's brain. Partner? he stammered. That's impossible. Oh, it's very possible, Julian said, stepping forward. He placed the blue-bound document on the table next to the deed. This is a portfolio of debt. Specifically, your debt, Marcus. The loans on your company, your properties, your precious Hamptons house. It was all recently acquired from your various creditors by a subsidiary of Sterling Westwood, which is to say, by me. He tapped the document. You're not an empire builder, Marcus. You're a tenant, and your rent is past due. As the new majority debt holder, I'm calling in my loans, all of them, effective immediately. The color drained from Marcus's face. He understood what that meant. It wasn't just a financial setback, it was annihilation. A complete and total wipeout. He was ruined. No, he whispered, shaking his head in denial. You can't. I can, Julian said, and I have. He looked past Marcus to Isabel, whose face was a canvas of pure, unadulterated horror. She wasn't just losing a fiancé, she was watching her entire fantasy life, the life she had betrayed him for, evaporate into thin air before her very eyes. You thought I was a man of modest means, Julian said, his voice soft now, but carrying more weight than all of Marcus's blustering shouts. And you were right. I chose to live modestly. I find true wealth in designing things that last, things that serve people. But you, he said, his gaze sweeping over Isabel, Marcus, and Elena, you only see value in what glitters. You are blind to substance. You mistook my choice for a limitation. You underestimated me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded pages from his wallet. The list of grievances. He didn't need to read it. He knew it by heart. You called my work doodling. You called my home sad. You conspired to steal my wife and my life, and you laughed about it. You thought I was a fool. He took a step closer, his eyes boring into Isabel's. The thing you never understood, Isabel, is that I never needed to be rich. I already was. I just never needed to show it. My integrity, my work, my self-respect, that was my wealth. And you threw it all away for a cheap imitation. He looked around at the stunned faces, the broken couple, the ruined party. The string quartet had packed up their instruments and were quietly trying to leave. The waiters stood awkwardly, holding trays of food no one would ever eat. This party is over, Julian announced, his voice echoing in the silent garden. He looked directly at Isabel, his eyes holding not anger, but a vast, empty sadness. I believe you have some things to pack. The aftermath was a symphony of collapse. Marcus didn't rage or fight. The complete, systemic nature of his ruin was too absolute for that. He simply crumbled. He sank onto one of the white party chairs, his head in his hands, as Anya Sharma's assistant, a young man with mercilessly efficient eyes, served him with a stack of legal documents. A notification of foreclosure, a summons for financial fraud investigation, a termination letter from the company he had founded, now controlled by Julian's interests. He was a king one moment, a peasant the next, and the speed of the transition had broken him. The guests, seeing the power shift as clearly as animals sensing a change in the wind, began to melt away. They offered no words of comfort to Isabel or Elena. They simply vanished, eager to distance themselves from the spectacular social implosion. They would talk about this day for years, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties and charity galas. The day the quiet architect revealed himself to be a king and publicly dethroned a prince. Isabel stood frozen, a statue of shattered dreams. Her white dress, once a symbol of a bright new beginning, now looked like a funeral shroud. She stared at Julian, her eyes wide with a terrifying new understanding. The man she had dismissed as weak, as unambitious, as less, was the most powerful person she had ever known, and she had thrown him away. Julian, she began, her voice a raw, broken whisper. I didn't know. That's the point, Isabel. he replied, his voice devoid of heat. It was the cold, flat finality that was so devastating. You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You didn't ask about my life, my work, my passions, beyond how they served your image of yourself. You looked at me, but you never saw me. You saw a reflection of your own dissatisfaction. Elena, her face a rictus of horror and fury, finally found her voice. You monster, she hissed at Julian. To do this to her, to us, to humiliate her in front of everyone. Julian turned his calm, assessing gaze on his mother-in-law. Humiliate her? He asked, a brow raised in genuine curiosity. I did not force her to lie to me. I did not make her plan a wedding to another man while she was still married to me. I did not stand by silently while my spouse was insulted and belittled in your dining room. These were all choices, your choices, her choices. He paused, letting the words sink in. I am not the cause of this humiliation, Elena. I am merely the consequence. He then turned back to Isabel. His expression softened, but not with forgiveness. It was with a deep, profound pity. I loved you, Isabel, he said, and the use of the past tense was another blow. I loved the woman I thought you were, the woman who hiked with me in the rain, who helped me lay the stones for this garden, who said she valued kindness over status. I don't know if that woman ever really existed or if I just invented her, but she's not here today, and I can't live with the person who is. He gestured toward the house. You have 1 hour. Pack a bag with your personal effects. A car will be here to take you to your mother's house. The rest of your things, the ones you didn't throw in the garage, will be sent to you tomorrow. Julian, please, she begged, tears finally streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. Don't do this. We can talk. We can fix this. There is nothing to fix, he said gently. A building with a failed foundation can't be fixed. It has to be demolished to make way for something new, something stronger. He looked at his house, his garden, the sky above. This is my demolition day, Isabel, and my foundation is finally clear. He turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing amidst the ruins of her party. He didn't look back. Anya met him at the gate. That was thorough, she said, a note of respect in her voice. It was necessary, Julian replied, his voice heavy. He felt no triumph, no elation, only the grim, hollow satisfaction of a painful but necessary surgery. He had excised the cancer from his life, but the scars would remain. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of the consequences played out with brutal efficiency. Marcus Thorne, stripped of his assets and facing federal investigation, disappeared from the social scene entirely. The last Julian heard, he was living in a small rented apartment, his Porsche repossessed, his empire a memory. He was a ghost haunting a world that had already forgotten him. Isabel's fall was less financial but perhaps more painful. She moved into her mother's spare bedroom, the same room she'd grown up in. But the house was no longer a bastion of social superiority. Elena, tainted by her daughter's scandal and the public nature of the collapse, found her phone calls going unreturned. Her lunch invitations were politely declined. The social circle she had so carefully cultivated had excommunicated her. They were pariahs, trapped together in a house filled with resentment and recrimination. Isabel tried to reach Julian. She sent long, rambling emails, a torrent of apologies, justifications, and pleas. She wrote about her confusion, her mother's influence, Marcus's charisma. The emails were all about her feelings, her pain, her regret. Julian read the first one, then deleted the rest without opening them. Her apologies were just another attempt to manage her own discomfort, not a true accounting of the hurt she had caused. Redemption, he knew, required more than just saying sorry. It required genuine change, and he saw no evidence of it. Julian, meanwhile, began to rebuild. The first thing he did was reclaim his study. He had a new drafting table built, even more beautiful than the last. He unboxed his books and placed them back on the shelves. He brought his father's armchair up from the basement and positioned it by the window. The room, once violated, became his sanctuary again. He threw himself into his work, but with a new sense of purpose. He used the vast resources now at his disposal, not to build monuments to himself, but to expand the work he had always believed in. He established the Croft Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding and designing innovative public architecture, schools, libraries, hospitals, and parks in underserved communities around the world. His life became quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the quiet of a man hiding his strength, but the quiet of a man who no longer needed to prove it. His wealth was a tool, not an identity. His true identity was in the blueprints spread across his table, in the grateful letters he received from communities transformed by his work. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, Julian stood in the garden. The tents and flowers were long gone. The lawn had recovered. He was holding a new set of plans, not for a skyscraper, but for a small, elegant Japanese rock garden he planned to build where the floral arch had once stood. It would be a place of contemplation and peace. His phone rang. It was Anya. "I'm looking at the quarterly reports for the foundation," she said, her voice warm. "The pediatric hospital wing in Peru is fully funded. The literacy center in Detroit breaks ground next week. You're doing good work, Julian." "We're doing good work," he corrected her. "Fair enough," she conceded. "By the way, I had lunch with an old friend of yours, Mrs. Gable, your neighbor. She said to tell you the roses are looking magnificent this year." Julian smiled, looking at the vibrant red blooms along the fence. "They are," he said. "They really are." He hung up the phone and looked at the space he was reclaiming. He had learned a brutal lesson about trust and betrayal. He had learned that some people are so blinded by the glitter of gold that they cannot see the value of a loyal heart. But he had also learned that true strength is not about the power you can wield over others, but the integrity you maintain within yourself. He had faced humiliation and had not allowed it to make him cruel. He had faced betrayal and had not allowed it to make him bitter. He had been an architect of buildings, then an architect of justice. Now he could finally go back to what he loved most, being an architect of beautiful things. He unrolled the plans for the rock garden, his hands steady, his heart, for the first time in a long time, completely at peace. The foundation was clear, and he was ready to build again. As we come to the end of Julian's story, we're reminded that a person's true worth isn't measured by their bank account or the car they drive, but by their character, their integrity, and the quiet strength they show in the face of adversity. Julian's story is a powerful lesson in patience and the ultimate triumph of substance over style. What do you think? Was Julian's response justified, or did he go too far? We would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know what you would have done in his situation. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. If you found this story of vindication as satisfying as we did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more tales of justice and redemption. We look forward to seeing you in the next story.